The universe doesn't give you what you ask for first. It tests who you become while waiting. And most people fail without ever realizing why. You don't lose what you want because you're unlucky or not worthy. You lose it because you're not yet aligned to carry it. And that's uncomfortable to hear but powerful to understand. Carl Jung believed life doesn't respond to wishes, it responds to inner structure. Before the reward comes, the test comes. Before the answer, the resistance. Before the gift, the transformation. This video reveals why delays, pain, repetition, and inner conflict aren't signs of failure, but proof that something important is being prepared for you. Once you see this pattern, frustration turns into clarity and waiting turns into strength. Stay with me, because what you're about to understand can change how you face every challenge from now on. At first, it feels unfair. He asks for growth, clarity, or success. And what shows up is resistance. Not comfort, not relief, pressure, like pushing against a door that won't open even though he swears he has the right key. This is where most people misread the moment. They think the universe ignored them. But in truth, the test has already begun. Resistance isn't rejection, it's the weight that reveals strength. Without resistance, desire stays shallow, unproven, and fragile. Think of desire like fire and resistance like oxygen. Without friction, nothing ignites. Carl Jung understood this deeply, even if he never framed it in motivational language. Growth requires tension between what he wants and who he currently is. That tension is uncomfortable, sure, but it's also precise. It targets the weakest parts of the psyche. The parts ruled by fear, impatience, or doubt. The universe doesn't test to punish. It tests to refine alignment between desire and the self. He sees this pattern everywhere once he looks closely. Someone asks for confidence, then life hands them situations that expose insecurity. Someone wants freedom, then obligations tighten. Someone wants purpose, then confusion hits hard. It feels backward, but it's not. It's training under pressure, like a muscle tearing before it grows stronger. The unconscious responds to intention with resistance because growth without stress doesn't last. What survives resistance becomes real. A practical way to work with this is simple, though not easy. When resistance appears, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" he shifts to, "What is this shaping in me?" If fear shows up, he trains patience, journaling nightly for 10 minutes, walking without headphones, letting thoughts surface. If doubt dominates, he builds discipline, reading 10 pages a day of something grounding like man and his symbols. Small acts create inner stability. Stability turns resistance into fuel. Here's the quiet truth most people miss. The universe always answers, just rarely in the form requested. It answers with growth disguised as struggle, with tests disguised as delays, and with resistance disguised as opposition. Once he sees that, frustration turns into curiosity. Curiosity becomes awareness, and awareness opens the door to the next realization. Because resistance doesn't just test desire, it exposes something deeper waiting beneath it. What unsettles him most isn't resistance, it's time, the waiting, the silence. He asks, commits, even changes his habits, and still nothing moves. This is where doubt sneaks in and whispers that the universe forgot. But delay isn't absence, it's incubation. Like a seed underground, growth happens where the eyes can't see. Carl Jung observed that the unconscious works on a different clock. Faster would break the process. Slower builds depth. Delay stretches patience, the way weight stretches muscle fibers. It hurts, but it strengthens. Many people quit right here because they confuse timing with rejection. They assume if it were meant to happen, it would have happened already. That's ego logic. Reality doesn't move on ego schedules. The universe delays to see if desire survives uncertainty, if alignment holds without immediate reward, if faith remains steady when progress isn't visible. He can spot this pattern in everyday life. Someone wants emotional healing, but old memories resurface for months. Someone wants clarity, but confusion thickens first. Someone wants success, yet routines feel boring and results flat. This isn't cruelty, it's calibration. Delay strips fantasy from desire. It forces honesty. Only what's rooted in purpose, not impulse, survives the waiting phase. Everything else fades out quietly. There's a practical way to move through delay without losing momentum. He anchors himself in process, not outcome. Morning routines that don't depend on motivation. Simple habits like daily walks, consistent sleep, and focused reading. Books like The Alchemist or Atomic Habits. He measures progress internally. Better focus, calmer reactions, clearer thinking. These are signs alignment is forming, even if external rewards lag behind. Eventually, something shifts. Not outside, inside. The urgency softens. The desperation dissolves. He realizes the delay changed him more than the result ever could. And that's when timing accelerates unexpectedly. Because when patience replaces pressure, resistance eases. And right there, in that quiet readiness, the next test begins. One that doesn't involve time but confrontation. Just when he thinks he's ready, something uncomfortable steps forward. Not success, not relief, his shadow. The parts of himself he avoids, fear, jealousy, insecurity, impatience, rise to the surface like uninvited guests. Carl Jung called this the shadow, but he didn't mean something evil. He meant something unseen. The universe tests these hidden corners first because whatever remains unconscious will sabotage any gift that arrives too soon. Most people want blessings without self-confrontation. They want growth without discomfort, but that's like building a house on unstable ground. The shadow holds unexamined habits, emotional triggers, and old coping mechanisms. When desire gets close to manifestation, these patterns activate. Suddenly, he reacts faster, doubts louder, or feels strangely threatened. This isn't regression, it's exposure. The test reveals what still governs him from behind the scenes. He notices this in relationships and work. Right before a breakthrough, old arguments resurface. Right before confidence grows, insecurity spikes. Right before clarity, confusion intensifies. The psyche brings unresolved material forward so it can be integrated. Ignored, it sabotages. Faced, it transforms. Jung believed wholeness required this encounter. Light without shadow creates imbalance. Awareness turns shadow into strength. Working with the shadow doesn't mean fixing everything at once. It starts with observation. When irritation appears, he pauses instead of reacting. When envy surfaces, he asks what it reveals about his own unmet needs. Writing these moments down helps. Short, nightly reflections, no judgment, just honesty. Reading Jungian-inspired works like Owning Your Own Shadow gives language to the experience. The goal isn't perfection, it's integration. Here's the paradox. The universe doesn't remove the shadow before rewarding you. It asks if you can carry awareness with it present, because what you receive amplifies who you are. If fear remains unconscious, success magnifies it. If clarity exists, success stabilizes it. Passing this test doesn't feel heroic, it feels humbling. And that humility quietly prepares him for the next realization, where desire itself comes under pressure. At some point, desire itself gets challenged, not by obstacles outside, but by exhaustion inside. He reaches a moment where chasing what he wants feels heavier than letting it go. That's intentional. The universe applies pressure to see if the desire is rooted in essence or ego. Carl Jung understood that the ego wants validation, status, and certainty. The deeper self wants alignment. Only one survives prolonged discomfort. Many desires collapse when life stops cooperating. They were fueled by comparison, urgency, or fear of missing out. When results slow, motivation fades. But authentic desire doesn't vanish under stress. It clarifies. It sheds excess. Like metal in fire, what's impure burns off. What remains feels quieter, steadier, less dramatic. The universe isn't asking how badly he wants something, it's asking why. He sees this clearly in careers, relationships, and personal goals. Someone wants money, but quits when routine replaces excitement. Someone wants love, but leaves when intimacy requires patience. Someone wants meaning, but avoids solitude. Pressure exposes intention. The test isn't external success, it's internal consistency. Does the desire still make sense when no one is watching, when praise disappears, when effort feels invisible? A practical way to refine desire is subtraction. He removes distractions that inflate ego-driven wants. Less scrolling, fewer comparisons, more silence. He asks simple questions during quiet moments. Would I still pursue this if no one applauded? Journaling helps. So does reading thinkers like Viktor Frankl, who emphasized meaning over pleasure. The goal isn't ambition, it's coherence between inner values and outer action. When desire survives this phase, it changes tone. It no longer feels desperate, it feels inevitable. He stops forcing outcomes and starts protecting energy. That shift signals readiness, but also invites a subtler challenge. Because once desire is refined, something else enters the equation. Something uncomfortable, yet transformative. Pain. Pain doesn't arrive randomly. It shows up with precision, touching exactly where certainty once lived. When he asks for more, growth, clarity, purpose, pain sharpens the request. It strips away vagueness. Carl Jung saw pain not as an error, but as information. It points to misalignment between who he is and who he's becoming. Without pain, desire stays blurry. With it, the question becomes unmistakably clear. Most people resist pain instinctively. They numb it, distract from it, or rush past it. But pain is like a strict teacher. It won't be ignored without consequence. Emotional pain reveals attachment. Mental pain exposes false beliefs. Physical exhaustion signals imbalance. The universe uses pain to renegotiate priorities. What once felt urgent suddenly feels irrelevant. What truly matters rises to the surface. He notices how pain simplifies life. After disappointment, ambition becomes more honest. After loss, values reorganize. After burnout, rest becomes sacred. Pain removes illusions the mind was too comfortable to question. Jung believed suffering forces consciousness to expand. It breaks the shell of the old self. The question changes from, how do I get what I want, to what is worth wanting at all? There's a grounded way to work with pain instead of fighting it. He slows down. Less reaction, more reflection. Simple practices help. Long walks, reduced noise, writing without filters. Reading books like Man's Search for Meaning anchors perspective. Pain processed consciously becomes wisdom. Pain avoided becomes repetition. The difference lies in attention, not toughness. Eventually, pain does something unexpected. It stops hurting in the same way. Not because it vanishes, but because understanding replaces resistance. The desire that emerges afterward is quieter but stronger. And just when he thinks the hardest part is over, another realization appears, because the one who asks is not always the one who decides. He believes he's the one asking, but that's only partly true. The ego speaks first, loud, urgent, certain it knows what will bring happiness. It asks for recognition, security, control. But deeper than that voice, another intelligence listens. Carl Jung called it the self, quieter, broader, less interested in comfort and more concerned with wholeness. The universe responds to that deeper layer, not the surface request. This is why answers often arrive sideways. He asks for success and receives responsibility. He asks for love and receives solitude. He asks for certainty and receives doubt. The ego feels confused, even betrayed. But the self isn't cruel. It's precise. It grants what develops character, not what feeds image. The universe doesn't negotiate with impatience. It collaborates with depth. He can observe this split in daily decisions. The ego rushes, seeking shortcuts and validation. The self hesitates, sensing long-term consequences. When he ignores that inner pause, things feel forced. When he listens, progress feels slower but sturdier. Jung believed individuation required trusting this inner authority. The test is learning which voice to follow when both sound convincing. A practical way to strengthen contact with the self is silence, not meditation in the dramatic sense, just regular quiet, no podcasts, no constant input. Even 10 minutes a day changes perception. Writing questions instead of answers helps too. Books like The Untethered Soul or Memories, Dreams, Reflections offer guidance without dictating direction. The self doesn't shout, it waits. When alignment forms, frustration decreases. Not because life gets easier, but because reactions soften. He stops demanding outcomes and starts cooperating with process. That's when trust replaces control. And with trust comes repetition, because lessons unlearned don't disappear. They return again and again until recognition finally settles in. He starts to notice the pattern, and it's unsettling. The same kind of conflict, the same emotional trigger, the same outcome dressed in different clothes. At first, it feels like bad luck, then like failure. But repetition isn't punishment, it's precision. Carl Jung believed the unconscious repeats lessons until consciousness catches up. Life isn't stuck, it's insisting. The universe repeats what hasn't been integrated. Most people try to escape repetition by changing environments. New job, new relationship, new routine. But the pattern follows because it lives inside. Until awareness changes, circumstances rearrange themselves to deliver the same message. That's why different people provoke the same reaction. Different situations trigger the same fear. The universe isn't being cruel, it's being consistent. He can see this clearly once he slows down enough to observe instead of react. Every repeated frustration points to an unexamined belief. Every familiar disappointment highlights an emotional habit. Jung saw repetition as the unconscious knocking louder each time. The door only opens when the response changes. Awareness interrupts the loop. Avoidance strengthens it. A practical way to break repetition is pattern tracking. He writes down moments that feel familiar in a bad way. Same tension in the chest, same defensive tone, same urge to withdraw or control. Over time, the pattern becomes obvious. Reading books like The Drama of the Gifted Child helps contextualize these cycles. Awareness doesn't fix everything overnight, but it stops the automatic replay. When repetition finally loosens its grip, there's relief, but also responsibility, because now he knows, and knowing removes excuses. The universe won't repeat the lesson once it's embodied. Instead, it raises the stakes. Pressure increases, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because what comes next requires a different kind of strength. Faith doesn't form in moments of ease. It forms when everything feels uncertain and he keeps moving anyway. When results are late, signs are quiet, and effort seems invisible, pressure reveals what belief is made of. Carl Jung understood that faith tested under comfort is fragile. Faith tested under strain becomes structure. The universe applies pressure not to break trust, but to see if it can stand without constant reassurance. Most people believe as long as things go well, the moment friction appears, confidence wobbles. But real faith isn't optimism, it's stability. It's continuing routines when motivation disappears. It's choosing patience when doubt feels louder than reason. Pressure strips belief down to its core. What survives doesn't depend on mood or mood swings. It becomes internal, grounded, unshakable. He notices this in everyday decisions, showing up when no one notices, continuing healthy habits when progress stalls, saying no to shortcuts that promise fast relief but weaken alignment. Pressure exposes whether actions are driven by conviction or convenience. Jung believed character forms at this junction. The unconscious learns consistency through repetition under stress, not inspiration alone. A practical way to build faith is commitment to small, boring acts. Same wake-up time, same reading window, same reflective practice. Books like The War of Art reinforce this disciplined mindset. Faith grows when behavior stays steady despite emotional weather. Pressure turns routine into identity. Identity creates trust, both inward and outward. Eventually something subtle shifts. He stops needing proof. He stops checking constantly if things are working. Faith settles into the background like a steady pulse. That quiet confidence signals readiness for the next stage. Because once faith stabilizes, the universe changes the test. It no longer pressures belief, it reshapes the person who's holding it. At this stage, something becomes clear, even if it's hard to accept. What felt like waiting was never about time. It was about transformation. While he thought life was holding things back, it was quietly reshaping him. Carl Jung believed becoming always mattered more than achieving. The universe doesn't rush outcomes because outcomes arrive empty if the person hasn't changed enough to hold them. This is why the process feels subtle and at times frustrating. There's no dramatic signal saying you're evolving. Instead, small shifts appear. He reacts less, he listens more, he feels steadier under pressure. These changes are easy to overlook because they don't announce themselves, but they are the real currency. The universe invests in inner structure before releasing outer rewards. He notices this reshaping in everyday moments. Conversations feel calmer. Decisions take less energy. Old triggers lose their grip. Things that once felt urgent no longer dominate attention. Jung would say the psyche is reorganizing. Old identities loosen, new ones form quietly. This internal shift is what makes future growth sustainable instead of overwhelming. A practical way to support this phase is reflection without judgment. He revisits old journal entries and notices progress he didn't feel at the time. He asks trusted people what they've observed changing in him. He keeps learning, books like Ego and Archetype or reflective biographies that show growth unfolding slowly. Awareness accelerates integration. The paradox is this: once he realizes he's being reshaped, impatience fades. He no longer feels behind. He feels in process. And when that realization settles, something unexpected happens. The desire that once pulled him forward loosens its grip. Because the final test isn't about becoming ready. It's about letting go. There's a quiet moment when everything changes, and most people miss it. Not because it's loud, but because it's calm. He realizes he's no longer chasing, pleading, or trying to convince life of his worth. The hunger softens, the urgency dissolves. Carl Jung would say this is individuation taking form. When the inner alignment is complete enough, the universe no longer needs to test desperation. Begging energy comes from lack. It says, I need this to be whole. But after all the tests, resistance, delay, shadow, pain, something stabilizes inside him. He wants, but he doesn't cling. He moves, but he doesn't force. This shift is subtle, yet powerful. The universe responds differently to someone who stands grounded than to someone who reaches from emptiness. He notices it in how opportunities appear. Less chasing, more invitations. Less explaining, more recognition. Not because he became more impressive, but because his energy became coherent. Jung believed the psyche attracts experiences that mirror its inner state. When desperation fades, reality reorganizes. What arrives now feels natural, almost anticlimactic, because he's no longer seeking permission. Practically, this stage is supported by restraint. He says, no more often. He protects his time. He stops overexposing plans before they mature. Reading Stoic thinkers like Marcus Aurelius alongside Jung reinforces this posture. He acts without broadcasting. He trusts without gripping. Detachment doesn't mean indifference. It means stability. Stability invites alignment. Here's the final irony. When he stops begging, he becomes magnetic. Not because he mastered manifestation, but because he stopped interfering with it. Desire turns into direction. Direction turns into presence, and presence quietly opens doors that effort alone never could. That's when the universe doesn't test anymore. It responds. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized the pattern. You've seen resistance before. You've felt the delay, the pressure, the repetition. Now the question isn't whether the universe tests you, it's how you'll respond the next time it does. Will you react with frustration or with awareness? Will you rush to escape discomfort or stay long enough to understand what it's shaping in you? Take what you've learned here and apply it intentionally. The next time life slows you down, ask what's being refined. The next time pain shows up, listen before you fight it. The next time a pattern repeats, pause and observe instead of running. Growth doesn't require dramatic moves. It requires conscious ones. Small daily actions, honest reflection, and patience under pressure change everything over time. Now I want to hear from you. Which test are you facing right now? Resistance, delay, or repetition? What part of you do you feel life is trying to reshape? Write it in the comments. Putting it into words is the first step toward awareness. If this perspective challenged you, grounded you, or helped you see your struggles differently, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to Mind's Silent Echo and turn on notifications, because here we go deeper into the mind, the shadow, and the quiet forces shaping who you're becoming.